Ah, Cyrodiil, where the rivers they flow, the hills they roll, and the people they... What is he doing? I've literally not seen this before, this is new to me. Hello and welcome to the world's worst review of The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, where there's a 0% chance of hearing that something is good, there's a 0% chance of hearing that something is bad, and there's a 40% chance of alienating references to British culture. Many moons ago, when this series was known as the D-View, I made a video on this game's sequel, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. In that video, I made a declaration that despite all of Todd Howard's blimp-like hot air spewing, Bethesda did in fact not make the most revolutionary open-world RPGs of a generation, and instead made comedy games. And with this statement in mind, I'm overjoyed to finally be able to discuss with you their magnum opus, the Citizen Kane of silly British people running into walls. I'm obviously not here to tell you whether this game is good or bad, but I am here to tell you that this might just be the funniest game ever made. In fact, I'm going to add it to the list of funniest games that we started in the world's worst review of Shadow the Hedgehog. There. It is, as of this moment, the funniest game ever made. Oblivion is a comedy of errors, presented as though it were a golden egg shit out of the wrinkly rectum of Queen Elizabeth II herself. There are moments where Oblivion fools you, momentarily, into believing that it is everything Todd Howard and his team say it is. When you first leave the sewers at the end of the game's prologue and the land of Cyrodiil is laid out before you, it is a simply enchanting moment, even a decade and a half later. There is an undeniable charm about this game's world. It's idyllic and tranquil and silly and gorgeous to look at, and totally trumps the world of its successor in my opinion. The NPCs, true to their British and American voice acting, are all clueless morons, and this results in some genuinely funny moments that are actually intended by the developers. The side quests are often whimsical and constantly subversive. A brush with death is one I always remember, though I can't tell if that's because of how different and adventurous it is, or if it's because I never knew you had to poison your weapon with the turpentine you're given to fight the trolls, and I just kept getting killed by them over and over again as a teen, and it made me really sad. Thanks for not giving me a thorough explanation on the possible applications of a fluid largely obtained by the distillation of resin harvested from pine trees. Shit for brains! But there's many a memorable quest in Oblivion. An unexpected voyage, in which you go to sleep in a sailing inn and awake to find it commandeered by hijackers, comes to mind, as do the ones where you join 4chan. One of Oblivion's many issues, however, is that a lot of your time, if you really want to progress in the game, isn't spent frolicking about in this silly, endearing world. A lot of your time is spent here, in Croydon, where you have to fight your way through mobs of hellspawn for even an inch of personal space, and all 3 KFCs are staffed solely by a German Shepherd with a kitchen knife for a head. So seemingly convinced that their windscreen wiper combat is up to an acceptable standard, Bethesda elect to litter the game's main story with these repetitive, samey-looking, enemy-infested slogs hidden behind the lazy eye of Sauron. But it's not just the Oblivion gates that are copy and pasted all over the place. It's every dungeon in the game that looks and functions almost exactly the same, as is the case with basically every Bethesda game. The Oblivion gates are a fascinating novelty at first, but by the time you get to gates 6 through 10, you'll find that they're not just the worst part of the game, they're the worst part of the year. They certainly were for me, and I literally have depression. Oblivion lives and dies by its brokenness. It's wildly entertaining when an NPC gets stuck in a door or has no concept of terrain traversal, yet it's mildly entertaining at best to take seriously, because every system it tries to implement fails. Insisting on scaling everything to your level is a Bethesda classic. From loot to rewards to enemies, everything's numbers go up when yours go up. Now, normally, a design decision as inelegant as this would only massively fuck up your game in one way, in that it'd ensure the difficulty curve stays as flat as sandpaper all throughout and rob the player of any real progression they feel when gaining power. But Oblivion even manages to do that wrong, by scaling enemies to your level not just by powering them up and increasing their numbers incrementally, but by replacing enemies with different, stronger enemy types entirely at certain level thresholds. So for the first few levels that bears and ogres start spawning in more frequently, the game suddenly becomes pretty hard again. Then, as you level up more, it gets easier again, and the cycle continues until the game throws its strongest possible enemies at you. They're a problem for a while, and then you level way past them as well, and the whole thing drops off a cliff. This means that Oblivion's difficulty curve, quite literally, hang on, I'm gonna get MS Paint up for this. This means that Oblivion's difficulty curve quite literally looks like this. That is insane. I don't know if I could manage that if I tried. And then there's stats and the way that they improve as you use them more often. This is another clearly well thought out Bethesda staple that I'm sure players will struggle to find ways to exploit. Ah fuck, I maxed out my streak in the tutorial. Oblivion is like a gamer at a house party. It crows so much about its own confidence, but if you look at it for more than 5 seconds, it breaks. I could go on about how it's also not really an RPG, much like the rest of Bethesda's games, but pretty much everything I said on that topic in that aforementioned Skyrim video applies here, so just go watch that. Oblivion is exclusively enjoyable when both you and the game stop caring. It's at its best when it stops pretending to be a functioning or elegant video game, and when it instead gives in to its true nature as a virtual interpretation of an overgrown child with an eccentric imagination smashing toys into each other on a playset and making silly voices. If I'd played this game for the first time at a younger age, perhaps it could have fooled me with its expansive open world and seemingly endless freedom, and its admittedly breathtaking soundtrack, one of my favourites ever. If I'd seen this all for the first time at 9 or 10, I could have gotten lost in Oblivion. But at 9 or 10, I could have gotten lost in Primarch. I did get lost in Primarch. So congratulations, Bethesda. You made a game that's approximately as immersive as the place that now sells Pickle Rick socks. I said in as many words not long ago in my also aforementioned world's worst review of Shadow the Hedgehog that I'd grown tired of internet armchair critics making a living out of stretching out and monetizing the same repetitive, lukewarm takes and lampooning things they'd never stand a chance at making themselves. But allow me to be a hypocrite just this once, because the way Todd Howard and his team talk about their games really fucks me off. If the designers truly remain as convinced as they seem that this game still holds up as a glittering evolution of game design, and not as an often unintentionally hilarious spoof of every trope and mechanic it tries to implement, then this may have been the world's worst review of The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivious. Farewell.